April 1945, Camp McCoy, Wisconsin. A young Japanese soldier sits alone at a long wooden table. His hands are shaking. In front of him, a hamburger, a bottle of Coca-Cola, a scoop of vanilla ice cream. He stares at the food like it's a weapon, like it might explode. For 3 years, his officers told him the same thing over and over. Americans are monsters. They torture prisoners. They kill for fun. If you're captured, they'll starve you, beat you, maybe worse. But now he's here, and nobody hit him. Nobody screamed at him. Instead, they gave him clean clothes, a warm bed, and this meal. He picks up the hamburger, takes a small bite. His eyes go wide. He chews slowly, swallows, then he puts the burger down, and he starts to cry. Not because the food is bad, because everything he was told was a lie. This is the story of Japanese prisoners of war in American camps, men who were taught to fear capture more than death, men who expected cruelty and got kindness instead. It's a story about hamburgers and Coca-Cola, but really it's about something bigger. It's about what happens when propaganda meets reality, when hatred meets humanity, and when starving men discover that the enemy isn't what they thought. This is what happened when Japanese POWs tasted America. If you're finding this story as powerful as I think you are, hit that subscribe button. We dive deep into World War II history that most people never hear about. You won't want to miss what comes next. Before we talk about the camps, we need to understand what these men believed. From the moment a Japanese soldier put on his uniform, he was taught one thing above all else: never surrender. Death before dishonor. It wasn't just a saying, it was drilled into their heads every single day. Surrender meant shame, not just for you, but for your family, your village, your ancestors. But there was something else they were told, too. Something darker. Their officers described Americans as demons, savages, men without honor who would torture anyone they captured. They were shown propaganda posters, drawings of cruel-faced American soldiers standing over beaten prisoners. Stories were spread through the ranks, whispers of men captured on islands who were never seen again. The message was clear: if the Americans catch you, you're as good as dead, maybe worse. So Japanese soldiers fought to the last bullet. They launched banzai charges knowing they wouldn't come back. Some even killed themselves rather than be taken alive. On islands like Saipan and Okinawa, Japanese civilians jumped off cliffs, mothers holding their children, because they believed the Americans would do unspeakable things to them. That's how deep the fear went. And for the soldiers who did get captured, most of them were wounded, unconscious, too weak to resist. Because no healthy Japanese soldier would surrender on purpose. Not if he believed what he'd been told. The moment of capture was pure terror. Picture this. You're a Japanese soldier. You've been fighting for days, maybe weeks. You're out of food, out of water. You're wounded, bleeding, barely conscious. American voices close in around you. This is it, you think. This is where it ends. You wait for the bullet, the bayonet, the beating. But it doesn't come. Instead, hands lift you up. Carefully, someone presses a canteen to your lips. Water, clean water. You're confused, maybe delirious. Is this a trick? They carry you to a truck. A medic looks at your wounds. He's calm, gentle even. He wraps bandages around your leg, gives you a shot for the pain. You don't understand. Where's the torture? Where's the cruelty? One prisoner later described it like this. He said he closed his eyes and waited to die, but when he opened them again, he was on a hospital bed. An American nurse was checking his pulse. He thought he was dreaming. Another man, captured on Iwo Jima, said he tried to pull the pin on a grenade to kill himself and his captors. But an American Marine tackled him, took the grenade away, then gave him a cigarette. The Marine didn't speak Japanese. The soldier didn't speak English. But the Marine smiled, patted him on the shoulder. It made no sense. These weren't the monsters he'd been told about. And that was just the beginning. The camps were nothing like they expected. Most Japanese POWs were sent to facilities in Hawaii, California, Texas, or the Midwest. Places like Camp McCoy in Wisconsin, Camp Clarinder in Iowa, Angel Island in San Francisco Bay. When the trucks rolled through the gates, the prisoners looked around in disbelief. These weren't death camps. They were organized, clean, almost comfortable. Rows of wooden barracks, gravel paths, mess halls, even a hospital. American guards stood watch, yes, but they weren't beating anyone, they weren't screaming. The POWs were taken to processing. They were given medical exams, deloused, handed fresh uniforms. Some men hadn't worn clean clothes in months. They were assigned bunks, actual beds with mattresses, blankets, pillows. One prisoner said he stood in the middle of the barracks and just stared. He couldn't believe it. He'd been sleeping in mud for a year. Then there were the showers. Hot water, soap. For the first time since leaving Japan, they could wash properly. Some men stood under the water for 10, 15 minutes, just letting it run over them. But the biggest shock, the guards told them the rules. No torture, no executions. You'll get 3 meals a day, medical care if you're sick. You can write letters home, you can even work, and get paid for it. Paid? The prisoners looked at each other. This had to be a trick, some kind of trap. But days passed, weeks, and nothing bad happened. Slowly, carefully, they started to believe it. This was real. Then came the food. For most of these men, the first meal in an American camp was something they would never forget. They were led into the mess hall. Long tables, metal trays, the smell of cooked meat in the air. They sat down nervous, uncertain. Then the food came. A hamburger, thick, juicy, still warm. White bread, soft and fresh. Mashed potatoes, green beans, a piece of cake. And a bottle of Coca-Cola, ice cold, condensation dripping down the glass. Some men just stared at it. They didn't move, didn't touch anything. One guard had to gesture, "Go ahead, eat." The first bite, that's when it hit them. This wasn't prison food. This wasn't scraps or leftovers. This was better than what they ate back home. Better than what most Japanese civilians were eating right now. One prisoner described it in his diary. He wrote, "I thought I was being fed like an American soldier. I couldn't understand it. Why would they treat us this way?" Another man broke down completely. He took one sip of Coca-Cola, set it down, and put his head in his hands. He cried, right there at the table. The other prisoners didn't know what to do. Some cried too. Others ate in silence, almost guilty, like they didn't deserve it. And the ice cream. That destroyed them. Vanilla ice cream, cold, sweet, creamy. Most had never tasted it before. In Japan, ice cream was a luxury, something only the wealthy had. Here it was just dessert. They couldn't process it. Everything they'd been told was wrong. Real quick, if you're enjoying this deep dive into history, do me a favor and subscribe. It helps us keep bringing you these untold stories from the war. All right, let's keep going. The mind is a strange thing. When everything you believe gets flipped upside down, it doesn't just accept it, it fights back. That's what happened to these men. They were being treated well, fed, clothed, given medical care. But their brains couldn't make sense of it. Some prisoners refused to eat at first. They thought the food was poisoned, or that this was all part of some twisted game. Fatten them up before the real torture begins. Others ate, but felt crushing guilt. They'd been taught their whole lives that surrender was the ultimate dishonor. And now here they were, alive, comfortable, while their brothers were still fighting and dying. One man wrote in a letter, "I am ashamed to be alive. I do not deserve this kindness." But here's the thing. The letters didn't always make it home. Some were censored by Japanese authorities. Others were simply never delivered. And the ones that did get through, families didn't believe them. They thought their sons were being forced to write lies. Propaganda to make America look good. Because how could it be true? How could the enemy be treating prisoners better than Japan treated its own soldiers? Inside the camps, the prisoners started to fracture into groups. Some accepted the reality. They worked, learned English, even played baseball with the guards. Others refused. They stayed loyal to the emperor, formed secret groups, glared at anyone who cooperated with the Americans. There were fights, arguments. One prisoner was beaten by his own countrymen for smiling at a guard. The camps became battlegrounds, not between Americans and Japanese, but between belief and reality. And reality was winning. As the months went by, a routine developed. Life in the camps became almost normal. The prisoners woke up at 6 in the morning, roll call, breakfast, then the day began. Some men worked. They could volunteer for jobs on nearby farms, in factories, or doing maintenance around the camp. And they got paid, not much, but actual money, 80 cents a day. They used it to buy cigarettes, candy, or toiletries from the camp store. Others took classes. The Americans set up education programs, English lessons, math, even vocational training, carpentry, mechanics. Why? Because the Geneva Convention said prisoners had to be treated humanely, and America followed the rules. In the afternoons, there was recreation. Baseball became huge. The prisoners loved it. They formed teams, played tournaments. American guards sometimes joined in. There were art classes, music. Some men carved wooden sculptures, others painted. A few even put on plays. One camp in California had a full garden. The prisoners grew vegetables, flowers. They said it reminded them of home. At night they gathered in the barracks, talked, played cards, listened to the radio. The radio was strange for them. They'd hear news about the war, updates, but it was American news, a different perspective. Some refused to listen, covered their ears, called it lies. Others listened carefully, started to question, started to wonder. And every day, 3 times a day, the meals kept coming. Hot food, fresh bread, meat, vegetables, dessert. It never stopped. One prisoner said it best. He said, "I stopped thinking of myself as a soldier. I started thinking of myself as a man again." That's what the camps did. They reminded these men what it felt like to be human. Now let's talk about the other side. Because while Japanese prisoners in America were eating hamburgers and playing baseball, Allied prisoners in Japanese camps were dying. The difference was horrifying. In places like Bataan, Cabanatuan, Changi Prison in Singapore, the Burma Railway, American, British, Australian, and Filipino prisoners were starved, beaten, worked to death. They got 1 meal a day, maybe a handful of rice, watery soup, sometimes nothing at all. Men lost half their body weight. Their ribs showed through their skin. Diseases spread like wildfire, dysentery, malaria, beriberi. Thousands died, not from combat, from neglect, from cruelty. The Bataan Death March alone killed 10,000 men. Prisoners forced to walk 60 miles in the blazing heat. No water, no food. Anyone who fell was shot or bayoneted. In the camps, guards beat prisoners for sport, for no reason. A man could be executed for stealing a banana or for looking at a guard the wrong way. There were no baseball games, no classes, no pay. Just suffering. One American POW later said, "We prayed for death, that's how bad it was." Why the difference? Japan didn't follow the Geneva Convention. They saw surrender as weakness, and they treated prisoners like they were less than human. America did the opposite. Even though they knew what was happening to their own men overseas, they still fed their prisoners, still treated them with dignity. Some people back home were angry about it. They said, "Why are we being nice to them? Look what they're doing to our boys." But the military held firm. "We're better than that," they said. "We follow the rules, even when the enemy doesn't." That decision saved thousands of lives. And it sent a message. Something was changing inside the prisoners. Not all of them, but enough to notice. The longer they stayed, the more the cracks appeared, in their beliefs, in their loyalty. It started small. A man would smile at a guard. Another would ask to learn English. Someone else would admit quietly that maybe, just maybe, they'd been lied to. The food was the biggest crack, because you can't ignore your stomach. Every single day, 3 hot meals. Every single day, treated with respect. And every single day, the propaganda made less and less sense. Some prisoners started talking openly. They'd sit in the barracks at night and whisper, "If Americans are monsters, why do they feed us better than our own officers did? Why do they give us medicine? Why do they let us write letters? Why are we still alive?" One man, a former sergeant, said it changed everything for him. He said, "I realized my country sent me to die, but America wanted me to live." That's a powerful thought. Others went further. They started cooperating, translating for the Americans, sharing information, not military secrets, just cultural things, language, customs. Some even began to admire America. The wealth, the freedom, the way the guards joked with each other, the way everyone had enough to eat. But not everyone shifted. There were hardliners, men who clung to the old beliefs. They saw the cooperators as traitors, cowards. Fights broke out. In some camps, the hardliners formed secret groups. They'd threaten anyone who got too friendly with the Americans. One prisoner was found dead in his bunk, murdered by his own countrymen for teaching English to a guard. The camps became divided. On one side, men who wanted to move forward. On the other, men who couldn't let go. And in the middle, confusion, pain. The slow, agonizing process of realizing everything you believed was a lie. Here's the thing the prisoners couldn't wrap their heads around. America was feeding them while fighting a war on 2 fronts. Think about that. The United States was sending millions of troops to Europe and the Pacific, building ships, planes, tanks, bombs. And still, they had enough food to feed their enemies. Not just enough, more than enough. The prisoners saw it every day. The waste alone was staggering. Leftover food from the mess hall, thrown away. In Japan, people would fight over scraps like that. The guards ate the same meals as the prisoners, sometimes better, steak, chicken, fresh fruit. One POW watched an American soldier toss half a sandwich in the trash. He couldn't believe it. He said, "In Japan, my family would have made that sandwich last 2 days." It wasn't just food. The camps had electricity, running water, heated barracks in the winter. The prisoners got new clothes when theirs wore out. Shoes, socks, coats. They had access to doctors, dentists, medicine. All of this for prisoners. Meanwhile, back in Japan, cities were being bombed, factories destroyed. The economy was collapsing. Civilians were starving. Rations had been cut again and again. People were eating acorns, tree bark, anything they could find. Japanese soldiers on the front lines were in even worse shape. No supplies, no food, no reinforcements. They were told to fight to the death, while their own government couldn't even feed them. But here in America, the prisoners had 3 meals a day, every day, without fail. It was a stark, brutal lesson. This is what industrial power looks like. America could fight a global war and still take care of people it didn't have to. Japan couldn't even take care of its own. Some prisoners started to understand. This war was already over. It had been over for a while. Japan just hadn't admitted it yet. Then the war ended. August 1945, Japan surrendered. For the prisoners, it was complicated. Relief, confusion, fear. They were going home, but what kind of home were they going back to? The repatriation process took months. Ships were arranged. Lists were made. Slowly, the camps began to empty. The prisoners were given new clothes, a small amount of money, and a ticket back to Japan. Some didn't want to go. They'd heard the reports. Japan was destroyed, cities flattened. Hiroshima and Nagasaki gone, millions dead, the economy shattered. And there was something else they were afraid of. Shame. In Japan, surrender was still seen as the ultimate dishonor, even though the war was over, even though the emperor himself had surrendered. These men had survived, and that was a problem. When the first ships arrived in Japan, the prisoners stepped onto the docks and saw the ruins. Burned buildings, starving people, children begging for food. Their families didn't celebrate their return. Some families refused to speak to them, disowned them, called them cowards. One man said his mother turned her back when he walked through the door. She said, "You should have died with honor." Others were luckier. Their families were just grateful they were alive. But almost all of them kept quiet about the camps. They didn't talk about the hamburgers, the Coca-Cola, the kindness. Because who would believe them? And even if people did believe them, it would only make the shame worse. You were treated well while we starved. So they stayed silent. For decades, many of these men never spoke about their time in American camps. Not to their wives, not to their children. It was a secret they carried alone. But years later, some finally opened up. They wrote memoirs, gave interviews, and they said the same thing. Those camps changed them. They learned that the enemy wasn't always evil, that propaganda was a weapon, and that sometimes kindness is the most powerful force of all. So what do we take away from this story? It's easy to see it as just a curious footnote. Japanese soldiers crying over hamburgers, a strange, almost funny moment in history. But it's so much more than that. This story is about the power of propaganda and the danger of believing it. Those men were told their entire lives that Americans were monsters. That capture meant torture and death. And it wasn't true, but they believed it so deeply that thousands chose suicide over surrender. Civilians jumped off cliffs. Soldiers fought to the last bullet. All because of lies. Now imagine if they'd known the truth. How many lives could have been saved? This story is also about choices. America had every reason to treat Japanese prisoners badly. They knew what was happening to Allied POWs in Japanese camps. The torture, the starvation, the death marches. They could have responded with the same cruelty. But they didn't. They chose to follow the rules, to treat their prisoners humanely, even when the enemy didn't. That decision said something powerful. It said, we're better than this. We don't sink to that level. And maybe most importantly, this story is about what food can reveal. A hamburger, a bottle of Coca-Cola, a scoop of ice cream. Simple things, but they told a bigger truth. They showed the difference between a nation that could barely feed its own people and a nation with so much abundance it could feed its enemies. They showed the difference between a system built on fear and sacrifice and one built on freedom and plenty. And they showed those prisoners something they'd never been allowed to see. That the world was bigger than what they'd been told. That the enemy was human. That maybe, just maybe, they'd been on the wrong side. War is brutal, it's destructive, it's filled with suffering. But sometimes, in the smallest moments, humanity breaks through. A guard handing a cigarette to a wounded enemy. A nurse checking the pulse of a man who tried to kill her countrymen. A cook serving hot meals to prisoners, day after day without question. Those moments mattered. They didn't end the war, but they planted seeds, seeds of doubt, seeds of understanding. And for some of those men, those seeds grew into something that changed them forever. That's the legacy of the camps. Not just hamburgers and Coca-Cola, but the reminder that even in the darkest times, decency is a choice. And sometimes that choice makes all the difference. Thanks for watching. If this story moved you or taught you something new, subscribe to the channel. We've got dozens more World War II stories like this one. Hit that bell so you don't miss them. I'll see you in the next one.